With the red hills silhouetted in the last golden light of day, the desert evening in southern Utah was hauntingly still. Meri sat alone on the wraparound porch of Lizzie's Heritage Inn, her family's historic bed and breakfast. The old wood creaked beneath her rocking chair as she moved slowly, deliberately, trying to calm the storm inside her. For the 7th time in 10 minutes, her phone buzzed. Notifications from blogs, messages from distant relatives, and alerts from social media platforms piled up. Meri ignored them all. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where sun and sky met in one final flicker of day. Her heart churned, a blend of grief, release, and fierce resolution. Something inside her had finally shifted. Not broken. Not collapsed. Something cleaner. Something final. Freedom. She opened Instagram, tapped Go Live, and stared into the camera. Her face was unreadable, like a storm barely kept at bay. "I've had enough," she began. "And I'm done staying quiet for people who never stood up for me." Within seconds, thousands had joined the live stream. Comments exploded. "Is this about the family? What's going on, Meri?" She didn't blink. Didn't stammer. She had waited long enough for this. "For over 10 years, I stayed silent. I played the loyal partner. The peacemaker. I believed in the vision, the unity, the promises. But behind closed doors, it was very different." She paused, her voice steady but strong. "There was someone I trusted. Someone I protected. And in return, I was made the scapegoat. A name wasn't necessary. But eventually, she said it. You told me we were family. You cried in my arms and said we were in this together. And then, you took everything. You let me be cast aside, and you never stopped it." Meri remembered the early years, the promises of family harmony, of shared purpose. She remembered stepping back legally so that another could become a spouse. It was supposed to strengthen their bond. Instead, it fractured her reality. She recalled nights alone while others shared laughter just across the street. She remembered the emotional isolation. And she remembered who stayed silent through it all. "You stood by," she murmured to the camera, "while I was diminished. And now, I won't be silent anymore." In another city, a woman watched the live stream from a dim kitchen. Her face paled as her children hovered nearby. She didn't speak. The words unfolding on the screen seemed to unmake something she believed she controlled. Moments later, a man arrived, visibly shaken by what he had seen. His phone hit the table with a loud crack. "What is she doing?" he asked, but the answer didn't come. The truth had already been spoken. Meri ended the stream without reading the comments or headlines. She placed the phone down, let out a long breath, and sat in silence. Then, the calls began. Christine was first. Then Janelle. "Meri," Christine said softly, "that was brave." Meri didn't respond right away. Was it brave? Or just overdue? Within hours, news outlets picked up the story. Online forums dissected every word. Hashtags trended. Supporters spoke out. "You were never crazy. You were just unheard." In the days that followed, Meri avoided the noise. She focused on the inn. She repainted guest rooms not out of necessity, but for joy. She hosted quiet dinners for locals. She planted lavender. She breathed. And then Elijah arrived. A university lecturer in town for a symposium, he had booked a weekend at the inn. He noticed more than just the historic charm, he saw her. Their first conversation was about literature. The second, about boundaries. By the third, Meri laughed, freely, without restraint. He didn't ask about her past. He asked about her future. What made her proud? What gave her hope? One night, beneath a canopy of stars, he spoke about resilience. The kind of resilience that doesn't sparkle on Instagram but sustains a soul through years of invisibility. Meri listened. And for the first time in over a decade, she believed she still mattered. She whispered, "I'm still here. And I'm still me." The lavender bloomed fully at Lizzie's Heritage Inn. Its scent curled through the hallways, softening the air like a sigh of relief. Meri had taken to waking before dawn, not out of habit, but out of curiosity for her own life, something she hadn't felt in years. Each morning began with coffee on the porch, a journal in hand, and silence that no longer felt like punishment. Elijah stayed 3 weekends in a row, citing the quiet and a good reading chair as excuses. Meri didn't ask for more explanation. She didn't need to. They spoke often and easily, about everything and nothing. One evening, as dusk melted over the hills, Elijah glanced at her and asked, "What did you lose that you're trying to find again?" Meri stared out at the horizon for a long moment. "Myself," she said. "But I don't think I'm finding her. I think I'm becoming her." He nodded, not with pity, but recognition. In Salt Lake City, Christine, Janelle, and Meri met again. No cameras. No scripts. Just 3 women and 3 cups of coffee at a small cafe nestled between bookstores and bike shops. Christine reached across the table. "You know," she said with a half smile, "we used to joke that you were the strong one. But now I think we were all just surviving differently." Janelle nodded, more reflective than usual. "We didn't know how to help each other. We were always trying to keep everything from falling apart." "No," Meri corrected softly. "We were always trying to keep him from falling apart." The silence that followed was different. Not heavy. Not sad. Just true. The women didn't need a reconciliation. They needed rest. And maybe, just maybe, a future friendship that had nothing to do with shared spouses or shared wounds. Back at the inn, Meri found a letter she'd written years ago, one she never sent. It had been meant for Robyn, scribbled after a long night of tears and confusion. It said things like, "I want to believe you meant well. I don't know where I went wrong. I miss the sisterhood we imagined." She read it once, then tore it up. Slowly. Carefully. It wasn't anger that guided her hands this time, it was closure. She no longer needed to be heard by people who had refused to listen. The internet, for all its noise, began to quiet. The headlines moved on. Reaction videos lost steam. Viewers had picked sides, debated motives, dissected footage, but Meri wasn't watching. One afternoon, she held a small dinner on the porch for guests and townsfolk. Local musicians played acoustic folk. Lavender bundles sat at every place setting. Elijah arrived late, with a book tucked under his arm and a smile that didn't ask for anything. He sat beside her, and she didn't feel watched, she felt seen. Later that evening, as the stars blinked awake, he leaned in and whispered, "You don't just survive fire. You glow afterward." Meri didn't reply. She just reached for his hand. Epilogue. It had been a year since the live stream. Lizzie's Heritage Inn had become something more than a stopover, it had become a sanctuary. Meri no longer defined herself by what she lost. She was building a life defined by what she chose. She chose early mornings and porch dinners. She chose lavender and laughter. She chose silence that comforted, not silenced. And maybe, just maybe, she chose to love again, not as a way to forget, but as a way to begin. Summer, the rhythm of life at the inn had settled into something that felt like peace. Tourists came and went, but some stayed longer, not for the attractions, but for the quiet, and maybe for Meri herself. People started calling Lizzie's Heritage Inn the place that heals. Word of mouth. A couple of kind articles. A blogger even called it the Lavender House. Meri smiled at the name. It didn't feel like a lie. Elijah became a regular. He never overstayed, never assumed, and never asked Meri to explain herself. His presence was calm, unshaped by expectations. He would sit on the porch reading essays by Baldwin, or poems by Mary Oliver, and occasionally glance up just to ask, "What are you thinking?" Sometimes Meri would answer. Sometimes she would just say, "I don't know yet." But one evening, under a desert sky streaked in lavender and coral, she told him the truth. "I didn't think I'd ever have a second chapter. Not one that belonged to me." "You're not in a second chapter," Elijah said, setting his book down. "You're writing a whole new story." Back in Flagstaff, rumors swirled online. There were whispers that filming would resume. That Robyn and Kody might do a limited series. That the producers wanted closure. Meri declined to comment. So did Christine and Janelle. It wasn't malice. It was boundaries. The three of them met once more, this time at a small retreat center outside Park City. A few days with no phones, no cameras, no past. On the second night, they sat around a campfire. Christine passed around mugs of tea. Janelle brought out an old deck of cards and started dealing a game none of them really remembered how to play. They laughed like women who had nothing left to lose, and everything left to live. Eventually, Christine turned to Meri. "Have you thought about writing it down? Your story?" Meri stared at the flames. "I'm not sure anyone would believe it." "They don't have to," Janelle said. "It's not for them." The letter. By mid-August, Meri had begun writing. Not a memoir. Not at first. Just letters. To herself. To her past. To the girl she used to be before marriage and reality TV. She wrote one she didn't expect, to Garrison. "I didn't know you well enough. I wish I had. I wish I had told you it was okay to be tired. That being strong doesn't mean being silent." She folded it, placed it in a jar, and buried it beneath the lavender bush near the porch. She didn't need anyone to read it. She just needed it to exist. A new beginning. One afternoon, Elijah asked her something she hadn't expected. "If you could go anywhere, no expectations, no responsibilities, where would you go?" Meri blinked. She hadn't thought in years about wanting something just for herself. She looked at him. "Scotland." He grinned. "Why?" "I don't know. The wild coasts. The weather. The space to think. Let's go." Meri laughed. "You mean, just like that?" "Why not?" It wasn't a proposal. It wasn't a test. It was a question of possibility. Of whether she believed she could live beyond healing. For the first time in years, Meri didn't feel afraid of the future. She felt curious. Final scene, 1 year later. In a bookstore in Edinburgh, Meri browsed travel journals while Elijah paid for a new copy of To the Lighthouse. Back home, Lizzie's was being looked after by a young couple Meri had hired. Christine and Janelle had visited the inn last month. They'd painted one of the rooms bright yellow and renamed it the sunroom. Meri and Elijah had no itinerary. They were just living. Later that evening, as the wind howled through the highlands, Meri opened her notebook and wrote 4 words. "I choose this life." And this time, she meant Scotland ended up lasting 3 months. Meri thought she'd stay for 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. But something about the place, the sharp sea air, the centuries-old cobblestone streets, the strangers who didn't recognize her from a decade of TV reruns, slowed her down. She sent postcards to the inn, which the caretakers pinned to the bulletin board for guests to read. One simply said, "I never knew silence could sound like freedom." Back home, things had changed, but gently. The lavender garden had doubled in size. The sunroom now had a waiting list for bookings, and a few regular guests had left behind thank you notes about how staying there had helped them get through divorces, burnout, or grief. People didn't come to see a former reality star. They came because Meri had become something different now, a witness. A woman who had burned but didn't turn to ash. The journal. Elijah handed her a leather-bound notebook for her birthday. Inside the cover, he had written, "For your voice, not their version of it." That night, she began what would eventually become her first manuscript, not a tell-all, but a tell-true. A book about letting go when it's no longer holy to hold on. About reclaiming identity after living under someone else's shadow. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. What people resonated with wasn't the family tree, it was the ache of self-betrayal and the beauty of beginning again. A voice emerges. By spring, the journal had become a manuscript. And the manuscript, after some gentle encouragement from Christine and Janelle, became a book proposal. She called it, "The Lavender Doesn't Lie." A publisher took interest almost immediately. Not because of her TV background, but because of how honest it was. Raw. Uncluttered. Hopeful without being naive. Meri went on a modest book tour, Salt Lake, Portland, Sedona, Asheville. At each stop, women lined up, not to ask for selfies, but to say, "I stayed quiet too. I forgot how to want things for myself. I thought I had to be small to be loved." She didn't have answers for everyone. But she had a chair, a hug, and the reminder. You still matter. Reunion. That summer, Lizzie's Heritage Inn held a small gathering. Not a production. No boom mics. No producers. Just Meri, Christine, Janelle, and about 30 women who had written to say her book had helped them leave toxic marriages, start businesses, return to school, or just breathe again. Christine baked. Janelle organized. Elijah quietly set up the string lights over the porch. Before the evening ended, someone asked if Meri missed being part of the show. She smiled. "I don't miss being edited." Everyone laughed. Then she said, more softly, "But I'm grateful. Not for what happened, but for what I made of it." A new chapter. One cool September morning, Meri stood alone at the edge of the lavender garden, notebook in hand. The flowers were fading now, turning silver and soft. Elijah came up behind her, coffee in one hand, a folded newspaper in the other. He smiled as he showed her the headline. Former TV stars book a sleeper bestseller, A Quiet Revolution in Healing. Meri took the paper, looked at her name in print, then at the garden, and said, "Funny. I didn't write it to be a success." Elijah grinned. "That's why it is." She turned the page in her journal and wrote the first line of her next book. There is life after survival. And it's worth writing down.